as we recover from the Great Recession. If we were to pass this bill providing jobs, which is something we have to do anyway, now when it would count would matter very much to the entire country. Let's reauthorize the entire bill and quit short-term extensions.
Gentlelady's time expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Madam Speaker, how much time is remaining?
The gentleman from Wisconsin has 6.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Illinois has 15.25 remaining. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Yield such time as you may consume to the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Mike.
Gentleman from Florida recognized.
Madam Speaker, the Chair of the Aviation Subcommittee went through the list of the airports that are within 90 miles and would be affected by the provisions of this extension. Now, all of those 10 airports were included in a amendment that was and a provision that's in the Senate bill, and passed unanimously. The only difference, and he spoke briefly to one of them again, is the provision that I put in, putting a restriction on paying more than $1,000 per ticket per passenger subsidy. And those subsidies start in Montana at one airport with $1,357. Another airport, one airport in New Mexico has a subsidization per ticket per passenger of $1,563. Now the granddaddy, the big enchilada in this whole thing is one airport in Nevada. Every ticket is subsidized $3,719. Now you're telling me that they are going to close down parts of the FAA to preserve this subsidy when this nation is on the verge of financial debt crises unheard in the history of our nation. So, again, I've tried to deal on a bipartisan, bicameral basis, working with folks to get this done. 21 extensions over 4 years. I'm not adding an entire bill. I'm adding that one provision. The other side added in one of their extensions an entire bill. The other language Mr. Petri spoke to was 10 airports that are within the distance of 90 miles that the Senate passed unanimously. So it's not like I'm taking some language. A Republican tried to change that in the Rules Committee, and I recommended against it, and we did not change it because, again, I want to have language that the Senate passed. So that's what we boil down to. On the eve of a crisis with FAA, on an eve of a crisis with our nation's finances, we're going to come and vote here. And I want people to go back and say, I voted for a $3,700 subsidy for air service for one passenger for one ticket. I want to see that list of names. Thank you. Yield back the bill.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Illinois.
Madam Speaker, at this time I would yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Illinois for yielding to me. And, Madam Speaker, I rise today in continued opposition to the Airport and Airway Extension Act of 2011, H.R. 2553. I will continue to oppose the FAA reauthorization until the FAA rethinks their ill-advised redesign for the airspace around New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. I have opposed this airspace redesign from day one, along with some of my Republican colleagues in New Jersey as well, and have fought its implementation every step of the way. Time and time again, the FAA has pursued the airspace redesign while ignoring the concerns of my constituents in Rockland County, New York. The FAA created their proposal with zero input from the very people whose lives would be most harmed by the proposal. In fact, even when we brought this up to the FAA, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming into holding a public forum in Rockland County. This plan, which will only save minutes on flight time, will disrupt the lives of thousands of residents in my district, in Rockland County in New York and in northern New Jersey, who live under the new flight plans. As my constituents have noted to me, the noise and air pollution in the area will increase. It is unknown how this increase in air pollution will affect the disproportionate rate of childhood asthma in my district. The modernization of our aviation system is necessary to bring it into the 21st century, to keep pace with the increased number of flights, and to also maintain our technological advancements by implementing new equipment to keep our system the safest in the world. However, there are several alternatives to this plan, and I encourage my colleagues to join me in opposition to this reauthorization. Not only are we going to have planes going into Newark Airport fly directly over my constituents, but now there are other paths of planes coming in from JFK Airport as well. This is government at its worst, running roughshod over the people that it's supposed to serve, not taking any kind of input. In fact, they come up with a redesign plan, and then when it's challenged, the person who decides the challenge was the very author of the redesign plan to begin with. Sounds like a kangaroo court to me. So I am going to continue to oppose these things. I think at a time when we're all talking about government spending less and being more sensitive, this is a good place to start, and I will continue to oppose the FAA reauthorization until the FAA halts and revises their deeply flawed airspace redesign plan for New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
I'd continue to reserve, given the difference in time remaining on each side.
Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Illinois.
Madam Speaker, thank you. I would ask my friend, the chairman of the subcommittee, if he has other speakers. If he has no other speakers, I am prepared to be the last speaker on our side and yield back if there are no speakers on your side to close. Madam Speaker,
excuse me. If you want to yield back, I was prepared to close at the very end for a minute or two.
Madam Speaker, yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we heard from Chairman Mica, who we have worked with very closely. He has done I think his very best up to this point to try and get an FAA reauthorization bill both out of the House and to the point where we can get it to a conference committee. So he said he's very frustrated with the process. We are very frustrated with the process. And today the extension that the majority is offering even frustrates us more, because we know that this is an extension, not a clean extension, but it has a rider on it involving Essential Air Services. The debate today and the discussion about this extension is not about Essential Air Service. Some members may support Essential Air Service, others may not support it. There's been a lot said on the floor today about subsidizing a $3,000 subsidy per ticket. Just for the record, we are not debating that. That is to be taken up by conferees if we ever get to conference. Members can in fact have their opportunity to make changes in the EAS program at that time. It should not be a part of this extension. But for the record, let me say that in reference to an airport that was mentioned in Montana, it is actually 607 miles from Denver to the Denver airport. So if you live in that community, it's not just a short drive to get in a rental car and drive to the Denver airport. Also, the Nevada airport that was referenced from Salt Lake City, you're talking 234 miles, and the list goes on and on. So that's an issue that we can debate at the appropriate time. Some changes may need to be made to the Essential Air Service program, but I think also we need to keep in mind we're not just talking about passengers getting from point A to point B, where there's hundreds and hundreds of miles to get there to the nearest large hub airport to catch a flight, but we're also talking about moving medical supplies, donor organs, and a number of other things. So it's not just passengers. And let me also say, my friend Mr. Mica mentioned as well that we've had an open process here. Well, in fact, we have not. The process has not been opened on this extension. In fact, the majority dropped the bill on Friday without consulting the minority. They did not consult with us about what may be in the extension. In addition to that, they went to the Rules Committee and asked for a close rule. so that no member who might be affected by this legislation or might have an essential air service airport in their district that may want to go to the Rules Committee and in fact get an open rule or come to the floor to debate the merits of keeping their airport on the EAS program. They did not have that opportunity because the majority asked for a closed rule. Had the majority come to us in the minority and said, we want a clean extension, we want to move it forward, we wouldn't be here today. We, in fact, would probably have voice voted this extension. It would have gone to the Senate. It would have been voice voted there. And, in fact, we would have been a step closer to making certain that the FAA is able to operate after the deadline on Saturday. Finally, let me say that we are frustrated because I've heard Chairman Mica say many times, and I said, as the ranking member, Mr. Rahal, has said, we have worked closely together. We've done everything we can do in order to work together with Mr. Mica and Mr. Petri in order to get a bill. But I've read reports, and I've just heard Mr. Mica say on the floor again today that, you know, we could wrap this conference up in 20 minutes, and he said today we could wrap it up within an hour, that there's only one issue that is remaining. Just for the record, let me say, if that's the case, we have not been consulted on that one issue. There are several issues, and just for the record, I would say, one, major issues that have not been resolved on our side, on the House side, between the majority and the minority, let alone on with the other body, is one, funding levels, two, essential air service, three is repeal of the National Mediation Board rule, four is the DCA perimeter rule, often referred to as slots. Other outstanding issues are occupational safety and health protection for flight attendants, the 3-hour rule for tarmac delays, the lithium battery issue, and the aircraft activity disclosure to the public, the BAR program. And I have a list of other things, to our knowledge, have not been resolved. So when the chairman or others say that we could wrap this up in 20 minutes or in 1 hour, I don't believe that is the case. In fact, I know it's not the case. We have not been consulted or negotiated to the extent that we could reach an agreement among ourselves on the House side, let alone with our colleagues over in the other bodies. So let me just say that it's a disappointment to me. We have worked closely together to move the FAA extension on a permanent basis. We're here on Wednesday. The FAA extension, in fact, will expire. The FAA will have to lay off employees this Saturday if, in fact, this extension is not approved by both bodies and sent to the President. And the Senate has already told us that they are not going to accept this extension with this rider, in fact, in the extension. They will approve a clean extension, and it's my understanding the other body is going to pass a clean extension and send it over here sometime today or by the end of the week. So it would be my hope that the majority would in fact accept a clean extension so that the FAA can continue to serve the flying public and do all of the things that are essential to keeping the safest aviation system in the world as safe as possible, so that we can begin to try and get a permanent bill and a long-term bill as well. Finally, I would conclude by saying that we need to appoint conferees. The Senate has passed their bill in February of this year. We have passed our bill in April, and we are here now in the latter part of July, and Chairman Mica is saying that all of these issues have been resolved but one, and we do not even have conferees appointed. So I would just encourage the leadership. Ranking Member Rahal and I have sent a letter to the Speaker and to the leadership in the majority saying, look, let's appoint conferees. The Senate has appointed conferees. The only opportunity we had to appoint conferees in the last Congress was in fact stifled and held up by the Senate and frankly by two senators from the state of Tennessee over one issue. So let's get the nonsense behind us. There's things in the Essential Air Program that I'd like to see changed. There are things in the bill that I would like to see us reach an agreement on. The only way to do that is to get an extension passed so the FAA can get past Saturday and operate until September the 16th. It will give us an opportunity to appoint conferees so that we can meet with the conferees who have already been appointed in the other body to reach a permanent agreement. The American people deserve better than what they're getting today on the floor of this House, and the American people deserve to know that we in fact are doing everything that we can to move forward to keep the safest aviation system in the world, exactly that, the world leader in safety around the world. So with that, I would yield back the balance of my time and ask my colleagues to vote no on this extension in hopes that we can pass a clean extension.
Gentleman from Illinois yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
I thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just conclude by urging my colleagues to support this 21st extension with a very, very modest change from a purely clean extension in that it yields to the Senate for a provision that's included in the Senate bill to eliminate quote-unquote essential air service for airports within 90 miles of another airport. We've talked about the individual flight subsidy. Let me just look at this issue from another point of view to make it perfectly clear what we're talking about. 8 of the 10 airports that would be affected are because they're within 90 miles, are within 90 miles of a hub airport. So that makes it much more convenient to just drive over. And what's the subsidy to each airport each year? Let me just mention it. Athens, Georgia, over $1 million of federal money so that people don't have to drive 72 miles. We have Morgantown, West Virginia, right near the Pittsburgh hub, nearly $1,500,000. The same thing, Hagerstown, over $1 million, so you don't have to drive over to 70 some miles to Dulles. Jonesboro, Arkansas, $800,000 a year subsidy. It's right next to the Memphis International Airport. Same thing, $1,600,000 going to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is 84 miles from the Pittsburgh International Airport. Franklin Oil City is getting a subsidy of nearly $1 million a year. They're right next to, they're with 85 miles from the Pittsburgh International Airport. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, nearly $400,000, also by Pittsburgh. And Jackson, Tennessee, $1,200,000 in federal taxpayer money, which is only 86 miles from the Memphis International Airport. It's hardly essential use of federal taxpayer money to provide non-essential subsidized airport service for people who could otherwise drive in an hour and a half to a hub airport that most of the people in the area probably are already doing already. So it's a very modest step. We're just doing what the Senate provides, and I'd urge my colleagues to support the legislation.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate has expired, and pursuant to House Resolution 357, the previous question is ordered on the bill. And the question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill, and those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Third reading.
To amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to extend the funding and expenditure authority of the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, to amend Title 49 United States Code to extend the Airport Improvement Program, and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition?
I'm sorry. I have a motion to desk, Madam Speaker.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
Yes, I am opposed to the bill.
The gentleman from West Virginia qualifies. The clerk will report the motion. Point of order is reserved. Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Ray Hall of West Virginia moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 2553, to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of the bill, add the following section. Section 7, baggage fees for members of the armed forces. A, fees. No air carrier may charge any fee for the transport of 4 or fewer items of baggage checked by a member of the armed forces who is 1, traveling in scheduled air transportation on official military orders, and 2, being deployed on or returning from an overseas contingency operation. B, definition. For purposes of this section, the term baggage does not include an item whose weight exceeds 80 pounds.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from West Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In June, the American public learned that a major U.S. airline greeted a group of Army soldiers who were returning home from the front lines in Afghanistan with a bill for almost $3,000, or $200 apiece, for each soldier to check 4 bags on a scheduled domestic flight. Americans were rightly outraged by the incident, which was explained in a YouTube video posted by one of our troops. In the video, one soldier notes that his 4th bag, for which he was charged $200, contained an M4 carbine rifle, a grenade launcher, and a 9mm pistol. Quote, "the tools I used to protect myself and Afghan citizens while I was deployed," end quote. A spokesman for the Veterans of Foreign Wars told the Associated Press the fees were, quote, "the worst welcome home any soldier could receive." The shock of even being charged is enough to make most servicemen and women simply shake their heads and wonder who or what it is they are protecting, end quote. Members of the armed forces who are serving our country on the front lines should not endure personal financial hardship when they are traveling to or returning from war zones. Yet the media's reporting of the incident last month showed that major U.S. carriers were applying the same or similar policies across the board. Airlines were charging soldiers to check 4 reasonably sized bags and were profiting at the expense of the brave men and women of the armed forces who were going to or coming home from war. This amendment, this motion to recommit, prohibits U.S. air carriers from charging soldiers for up to 4 bags of checked baggage. It applies to bags that weigh 80 pounds or less and is consistent with many airlines' published policies. I urge my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion, as they should, to support this amendment. If the amendment is adopted, it will not kill the bill. The House will vote on the bill immediately after this amendment is adopted. This motion recognizes a tremendous debt of our gratitude owed by the United States to the men and women of our armed forces. Members of the armed forces who are going to the front lines or coming home from a war zone should not be given a bill with their boarding passes. I urge my colleagues to join me in ensuring that our nation's airlines treat our warriors with the respect they deserve for defending our country. This is a bipartisan, should be a bipartisan, overwhelmingly yes. And I close by saying, vote for our veterans. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman may not reserve the balance of his time.
I yield back the balance of my time then, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from West Virginia yields back the balance. Does the gentleman from Wisconsin continue to reserve his point of order?
I withdraw my point of order, Madam Speaker.
The point of order is withdrawn. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I rise in opposition to recommit, ma'am.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. I think it is absolutely outrageous what happened to those soldiers. As a military officer for 24 years, and as an airline pilot for 17 years, I think it is absolutely heinous what happened to those soldiers. Quite frankly, it's outrageous. And I think we should ask Chairman Mica for open debate on this issue. It's something that definitely should be taken a look into. Matter of fact, I think it is so critical, I will ask Chairman Mica to make sure that this does never happens to another United States service member. But unfortunately, Madam Chairman, we're bringing this up on a motion to recommit. My question would be, why didn't we bring this up earlier, this act? We should be debating this when we have... just a moment, sir, and I'll yield. We should have opened this up when we had open committee, and this should have been brought up then, but not now in the motion to recommit when we have FAA jobs on the line and we need to get this bill moved forward. I look forward to engaging that debate a little bit further on, and I look forward to working with you in ensuring that this does not happen again, but now is not the time.
and we need to investigate this a little bit later on, and I yield back the balance. I yield to the gentleman.
I would, in response to the gentleman's question asked a few seconds ago, it was a closed rule. There was no way we could have brought this up in the amendment process. The gentleman's party controls the rules of this body and controls the legislative debate.
I yield back my time. We did have an FAA open debate, Madam Speaker, and we could have brought this up at this time. And quite frankly,
the gentleman continued to yield. The incident did not occur until after the markup of this bill, by the way.
I'd like to have regular order, ma'am. We should not be opening this at this time on a motion to recommit. I will fully work with the other side in trying to make sure that this does not happen again to another soldier, and I look forward to that discussion. But having it right now is a little bit disingenuous on this FAA reauthorization. So I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Minnesota yields back the balance of his time. And without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit, and the question is on the motion. Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. The noes have it. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested, and those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the Chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of passage. This will be a 15-minute vote.
So with general debate wrapped up, the House voting on a procedural motion related to this bill extending FAA programs. The current extension stretches until Friday. The extension the House is working on would continue until September 16th. After this procedural vote, we are expecting a vote on final passage. Meantime, House and Senate negotiators continue to work to resolve differences in the underlying bill to produce a longer-term measure. Senate negotiators continuing to craft their own version of the bill. Again, members hoping to wrap up work on this before it runs out on Friday.
On this vote, the ayes are 187 and the nays are 233, and the motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. Gentleman from West Virginia.
Ask for a roll call vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring the recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered, and members will record their votes by electronic device.
House votes now on final passage of this bill extending FAA programs. The current extension stretches until this Friday. The extension the House is voting on now would continue until September 16th. In the meantime, House and Senate negotiators continue to work to resolve differences in the underlying bill to produce a full reauthorization. And this is a 5-minute vote, and after this we expect debate on a bill renewing trade restrictions on Myanmar, also known as Burma. The Senate earlier today voted down an amendment to the budget resolution, voting down the Vitter amendment 69 to 30. Senators have been debating the federal debt and deficit throughout the day, and the latest push is on the Gang of Six proposal, which calls for $3.7 trillion in long-term deficit reduction over the next 10 years, an increase in tax revenues by $1 trillion by closing a number of special tax breaks and havens. It's a bipartisan effort. It does have support of President Obama. The debt ceiling deadline is just weeks away. It's August 2nd. Senators have come to the floor to talk about it. You can see what they have to say on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. Also this, President Obama is meeting with Democratic leaders this afternoon to continue deficit talks. That meeting includes Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Majority Whip Dick Durbin, House Minority Leader Pelosi, and House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer. He will also be meeting, the President that is, with House Speaker John Boehner and Majority Leader Eric Cantor. That'll happen later this afternoon at 5 Eastern.
On this vote, the yeas are 2.